Welcome back to the Across Table podcast. I am Kyle, and for the first time since this quarantine has started, I'm actually
back.
We got Dylan back, and not only that, but we are joined today by a very good friend of mine, a senior pastor at First Christian Pleasant Hill, Scott Williams, and we've been friends for
Too long.
I can
Definitely
yes,
too long.
we've seen some incredible things, including Chris got married. Can you?
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
one of the things that just sideswiped me.
Yeah, definitely.
That whole process. So, Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good.
Yeah. You gotta. I know. We were talking about before we started recording. Before Dylan got here, we're gonna be in quarantine for like a fourth of the year.
Right.
2020.
Right.
Way to go.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Scott, why don't you? What are you about? What's your story? Give us I know that's a big question, especially someone like you that's done a lot. Why don't you give us a brief summary, just like who you are, what you're about, like why you believe what you believe. I know those are all hour-long questions,
Right.
especially being a pastor. Like we just sermonate,
Right.
But yeah, who are you, Scott?
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks for that intro. Who is Scott? I guess I'm a guy who is a follower of Jesus. That's the first thing I want to say. His ways, his teachings, his examples, just looking to him. Of course, I consider him my Lord, my Savior, but just looking at the figure of Jesus and admiring his character and what he tried to do in the world and continues to do in the world. And those things kind of drive both the way I live and the way I interact with the world around me, both locally here and around the world, doing work with addressing issues of poverty and homelessness. And I just try and keep myself open to whatever I feel like God's telling me to do, and then kind of measure it up against my enjoyment of doing new things all the time to make sure I'm just not running off the rails all the time. Most of the time I am, but that's all right. And and that's led me to many great adventures in life. So I think that's me in a sort of nutshell.
Well, and you've traveled a lot. And where did you go? Where do you go? I can't remember the name of the place that you go, which is super bad. I feel like I should definitely know this like off the top of my head, but you go there for missions. You help with where was that?
We've recently formed a nonprofit called Change Beyond Borders, and we've focused most of our work in El Salvador lately, but that's just coincidental. We've also been out to Guatemala. We were going to the Philippines in 2 months, but unfortunately that is not going to be viable. So we're doing some work over there, though, regardless of us physically being there. Just built a church there. So do a lot of overseas work. That kind of opened up to me when I took a trip to Nicaragua a couple of years ago with some friends of mine, and I was driving by a shack with some people that were living in the mud. A hurricane had just hit there, so we'd gone to do one thing, and we flew over the hurricane and looked down into it from the airplane. And just didn't go there for hurricane relief, but since we were there at the time, everything just changed. And so it really taught me that being out in the mission field, or, if you want to get rid of the religious speak, just being out there helping people any way you can, you have to be incredibly flexible and willing to just put it out there. And then I was driving by this hut with these people that were living in just terrible conditions, mud. The house was made out of sticks, literally. And the strangest thing is I'm a pet fanatic. I love pets. I don't have any right now. Well, there's a fish tank right behind me, but so I guess I can't say that. But they had how you get these old oscillating fans that just kind of oscillate back and forth. They have those metal cages.
Yeah, the ones that you say "I am your father" into.
Yeah. Oh yes. Man, it's been a while. So I realized that they had these native parrots, little tiny parrots in a cage. They didn't have a fan in there. That'd be horrific. Okay. But they had the cage halves, and they had put them together, and they had little parrots there, and they were selling them. And so so I'm making this strange. I'm drawing this strange picture of these birds in a cage that I'd buy here in the United States, and the birds in the trees right above this cage of caged birds, and just feeling how weird that felt, reality and consumerism, and then just feeling really bad for these people I was looking at. And I really felt God spoke to me and said, who are you to feel bad for them? Why don't you take a second look? And so I was like, what? Okay, this is what God does to me a lot, I think. And so I turned and looked, and that's when I realized they were smiling, the whole family. They were happy, they were joking, they were messing with each other, they were sweeping the yard together. And I just thought, man, they're really happy. They may not be living according to my standards, but they're happy. And so it really just kind of shook my world. That was about 5 years ago, and ever since I've been going to other areas, addressing issues of poverty, but also trying to keep my eyes open to the reality behind what I judge as poverty. What is real poverty, right?
What would you say is real poverty then?
I think real poverty is despair.
Okay.
Like just not having a vision for life. Jeremiah 29:11 tells us that God has a vision for a plan for our future, a plan to give us hope and a future. And I think when you get really racked down into poverty, or I think a lot of people are kind of experiencing it right now in the COVID stuff, where you don't feel like there's any out. A lot of people, their reactions are anything from, well, it's nice to be home and spending more time with the family, which is a little bit my reaction, all the way to the government is doing this and is purposely crashing the world to form a one world government and religion and
end times and all that.
Yeah.
Evil John Lennon, he's back.
Yes. And you have to pay attention to all that, because the reality is, all of that can be true. You don't know. But when you're stuck in despair, you're stuck in poverty. You can have all the money in the world around you. You could be sitting in that, plush house with the plush gear and everything and be completely unhappy. And we hear those stories all the time. So I think the biggest poverty for people to pay attention to is the poverty of their spirit rather than the poverty of their wallet. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good. I'm going to use that as the tagline when I post it, by the way. That's going to be
Poverty
right
of the Spirit.
there. Wow. Poverty of the Spirit. So speaking of, staying in that realm of poverty and going out and doing those, really that work that you feel so called and really not even called to do. I think that's part of it, but there's just, it's even deeper than that. And I think for some people, the word calling is just like, oh, well, like it's way off there. Like, yeah, I'll go do it. I'm called to be a minister. I'm called to be a pastor. Like it's way off there. But yours, it's really a deep seated, just like conviction almost, where it's like you can't just look away from it.
Right.
And I've seen you manifest that in some pretty incredible ways. When I came back from the Virgin Islands, I believe it was, and I think I had actually just stepped out of ministry at that time.
Yeah.
You had left your position. You had started to phase out there and start to work for the county. Tell us a little bit about that. What was your experience? Who are you working with? Like some crazy stories from there.
Yeah. So when I was finishing up a master's degree in Christian ministry and global issues, I thought to improve my pastoring skills beyond just having a bachelor's degree in medieval literature. I just thought, and that's a story too, right? I didn't intend to be a pastor. So it's this kind of how God works with me. I think it's because I'm stupid. But anyway, when I was finishing this degree, I really felt a strong calling to pay attention to the poverty that was in our area. The global issues really started to speak to me about why this was happening. And I kept thinking, we have all this technology in the world. Why can't we just solve global hunger just to start? And why can't we just solve global access to fresh water? And the answer is we can, but we're not. We easily could, but we're not. Hearing the stories, I haven't looked into them or validated them. But of farmers being told to slaughter their animals because the processing plants aren't running here in the United States, and throw your groceries away and stuff, or your vegetables. That why isn't that being shipped out to other countries? We're too myopic in what we're looking at. But anyway, I was walking around. I live in Martinez. I was walking down Main Street when all this was kind of hammering me, trying to figure out, is God going to make me do something else now? And I walked by a guy who was sleeping on the sidewalk in an alcove, and he had his head covered in a box, trying to keep warm. And so you couldn't see him at all, but you knew there was a person there, and you could see his feet, dirty feet sticking out from his sleeping bag. And I snapped a picture, made sure that I wasn't showing him for privacy reasons, and then posted it on Facebook. And I think I said something like, something's got to change.
Yeah.
And that was really a statement about myself. And I just didn't realize it at the time. And so I just felt this real strong call to get into homeless ministries. And then I realized I didn't know anything about homeless ministries other than what everybody knows about it. These people that are kind of scary and sleeping in doorways, and I try and avoid them. And I also feel really sorry for them. And so I had a buddy who ran the Concord homeless shelter, and I called him up and said, hey, I've got this stuff going on internally, and I realize I've never even seen a homeless shelter, and you're running one. Is there any way I could just come visit it? And he said, sure, I'd love that. Let's get you set up and blah, blah, blah. And I think a week or two later, I was visiting and gave me the full tour. And I was really excited about what I was seeing, what the county was doing for the homeless in Contra Costa County. And they're just doing some fantastic work. They still continue to do even more fantastic work. But he took me up to his office, and there was another guy I'd never met in there. And I was talking to my friend, and I was thinking church, right? Like, I don't want to physically get involved, but I have the power of an organization that I'm involved with that I think would like to get involved in helping. So that's where I was going. And I said, well, what could I'm looking for what would be the next step for us to get involved in helping this crisis. And the guy I didn't know spun around with an application, and he handed it to me. They totally set me up and said, well, you'll take this job. And I'm like, what? And I had that moment of feeling like I had when I felt God called me into pastoring too. So I was like, oh no, this is real. And I had to make some hard choices because I love the church I was at. I'm actually lead pastoring a different church now. I continue to be in relationship with that other church and love the pastor there, Bill Francis, quite a bit, and everybody. And there were some other factors, like I would have to take a 30% cut in pay to go do this unknown job. And I had just accrued a pretty good student loan, finishing my master's program. Yeah. I just felt like I had to do it. It was overwhelming. So I just told them I wanted to sit on it. And I went through the application process just to see if I'd even qualify. Yeah. And it got to the place where they said yes, and we want to offer you this job. And I thought, uh-oh. And eventually, it was kind of funny. I was at a Catalyst conference. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that conference. It's just fantastic. Mm-hmm. And it was being, the idea behind the Catalyst conference is being a catalyst for change in the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot of religious people there. It's aimed at pastors, but it's also a lot of secular business people there, because it's just talking about being a catalyst for change in the world.
Folks who have an ability to go out and do
that, okay. Yeah, or a strong desire to do that. So It was just unfortunately or fortunately confirming all this in me. And so I had a moment where I had my lead pastor alone, and I said, man, I feel really called into this. Can we have a conversation about this? Mm-hmm. I had a lot of fear that it would break our friendship or I'd be bailing on him. And he very quickly, within 15 minutes, had encouraged me to, reluctantly encouraged me to do this, that he knew this was my calling. He had seen it. He referred back to that picture I took on Facebook.
Right.
And just knew that this was a God-given passion of mine. And so we were both actually really sad by that transition. Mm-hmm. And we had another pastor working with us at the time, Mark Whitwell. And so we knew we had the bandwidth, but it was just a hard decision. And so I stayed as a lay pastor. I went into work in the field full time with C.O.R.E, and then quickly kind of ended up realizing that full-time work with the homeless was consuming my whole life, and I just had no bandwidth for anything else. And so I really stopped doing any duties from a pastoral standpoint, unless it was a fill-in basis or playing bass in the band or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And that was about it. And I went full-time ministry, or homeless ministry. I guess it's not ministry.
But, right. Outreach, I think, was the word that we had used previously. Yeah. That's crazy. And then you were in that for a while. And then I remember it might have been, I don't even know, how long were you in that position?
So I did that for a year and a half.
Okay. That's what I thought. Because I know it was in the summer-ish. Yeah. We had started talking. We met up for like Chipotle or something.
Yeah,
like we always do.
Like we always do. Yeah.
Like we always do. That's a ministry right there.
Right.
Discipleship. And that's when you kind of shared to me about this church. And the funny thing about this church is way back when I was an intern for Creekside, this church in Creekside and I think Morello Hills were all kind of part of that that pastor swap. Yeah. And so Terry had come here to preach, and so he brought me along with him. We had like 4 interns at the time. Yeah. We had a lot of interns. And so he brought me here. And so I had actually been able to visit this church years and years and years and years before you got to step into it. And so it was really cool. Like when you had said the name of the church and then like I Googled it, I was like, that looks super familiar. Have I been there before? And then I came here and that was just like, oh, I have been here before. Yeah. So it's really weird how all those things kind of just like come around.
Well, what's really strange, I'm not sure I've shared this with you, but when I first really was kind of exploring my faith, so this was when my son was born and he's 26 now, so it's been a while. But I moved back to this area. I'd moved up to Roseville for a while. And I had a friend, I was working at Home Depot and those kinds of stores for about 12 years. And I had a friend say, hey, you seem like a really great guy. I think you'd really enjoy coming to church. You know, you've mentioned God a couple of times. Would you like to come to church with me? And I said, sure. And we came and it was this church. And then as we started attending, I eventually was baptized here. My wife was baptized here. My son was baptized here. My daughter was born while we were here. I became a deacon here.
And I would just like to say your baptism thing is super cool. Just like being able, I want one of those bad.
I know. It's a little hot tub.
I'm sorry.
We'll show you later. It's really cool. It's like,
it's amazing.
Let's get a picture of it.
We'll have a little party,
have a
hot tub baptism party.
Hot tub baptism.
So and then I got called into, we just felt like we needed to move closer to our house so that our kids could invite their friends to church. And so we moved to Morello Hills. But so it was weird, like this is coming home for me, is what I kept thinking when I was offered the position. I was still friends with a lot of people that still are attending here. And they had lost their pastor right about the time that I had left the homeless ministry. And they offered me the position, and over the course of about 6 months, we just transitioned. So here I am back home. I'm actually sitting in the office of the pastor who baptized me and who I consider my spiritual father.
That's crazy.
That's full circle.
That's
So I'm sorry. How long have you been in this position here?
I've been in this position for 1 year and 1 month.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay.
And it's been quite the ride. It's been quite the ride. Yeah.
Well, it's been really cool to kind of along the same lines as that. I know when I went away to New Hope for a year, I stayed in the same dorm that Chris, my youth pastor who led me to Christ, and then Pastor Terry, same exact dorm room.
Oh, really?
It was just like weird because I told them, they're like, oh yeah, we stayed in that room. And I was like, what the heck? And so it was really cool. Just kind of like you said, that full circle thing.
Yeah.
For the time that you were, I can't remember exactly if you were starting the Tiny Homes nonprofit while you were at Morello, or if that was a different time. What was that?
Yeah.
Time frame?
So when I was doing the C.O.R.E homeless outreach, so what that is you're paid full time to jump in a county car with a partner and bags of food and socks and water, flats of water and all that stuff. You're paid to drive around a specific route. So I had Pleasant Hill and Martinez, and you drive around for 8 hours with your partner for safety, and you try and connect with homeless people wherever they are, get to learn who they are and what they're struggling with. And you're basically, the goal is to try and build a relationship that will allow you to speak into their lives.
Right.
And so at first you go, it's fairly dangerous when you first encounter somebody because they just think you're the police.
Right.
But for some reason you're dressed in a t-shirt and you just got bags of food, which was very intentional by the county. And then they realized that
it was intentional that you
were
like
casual.
You were
that you were casual.
Okay.
Yeah. In its infancy, the program started off and the people were actually driving around old police cars that the police department were loaning them. Okay. And they had flak jackets on. It's a very dangerous line of work. And that quickly became apparent that the homeless would never open up, that those people were just, they're just an extension of the police. And that's not what that's intended to be. And so while we did work with the local police department, it was more of giving them the option of calling me and saying, hey, Scott, I got this person behind the Goodwill in Pleasant Hill on Contra Costa Boulevard. and I gotta take him in unless you can come down here and try and talk him into something different. And so I'm like, hey, thanks, I'll be right there. And you just hop in the car and you get up there. And so it was more of a partnership with the police in a positive way than it was being part of a perceived
like a
police
task force.
Yeah. Even though you work real closely with them. And I got to say, the local police departments are incredibly kind to the homeless. They have an incredible heart for serving the homeless. None of them signed up for working with the homeless. They signed up to protect me and you and lay their lives on the line for that. And they're nervous enough about that. But they didn't sign up for this work. And the reality is, I remember in Concord when I was working, so the Concord Police Department has to answer all calls from the Concord Homeless Shelter because it's in the city.
Right.
So they have a higher level of calls, but their calls one year when I was working there, 84% of their calls were homeless related.
Wow.
Just all calls?
All calls that came into the Concord Police Department. Yes.
And Concord's not necessarily the safest of cities. It's not.
No,
it's a
highly
huge
dangerous
demographic there.
That's fair. Yeah, it's very
but it certainly doesn't. I don't think has even one area that's super ritzy or anything.
No,
right? No. It's all middle class down.
Yeah,
sort of. We're using the wrong. But anyway, so we're helping there, and so while I was there, I'm trying to remember what you said, Kyle. This is what we do. We get
we start going,
and it's all over. So when I was there, one thing I realized is I was getting really frustrated because my options were, all I wanted to do was to give that homeless person a vision, right, for their life,
right,
more for their life. And maybe that's not living in a house. A lot of the homeless would tell me they purposely are homeless because they just got tired of dealing with the pressures of normal life, a mortgage, PG&E, water.
I identify.
Kind of doing a Kerouac thing.
Yeah. Okay. And so basically, honestly, they would tell me, this is like, imagine going camping every day of your life and not having to have a job to pay for it. It's all free. And that is not what happens out there, but it's a statistic that for us that we knew that if we couldn't reach a person that was newly homeless within the first 30 days, the odds of getting them off the streets just exponentially declined.
Right.
Because they would unwind, they would finally realize, hey, this isn't so bad. And that's where they'd want to be.
Right.
And you can imagine the demographic that of a person who ends up homeless probably isn't the most driven person to begin with.
Right.
But that's not always the case. But I can say, it's a huge case. But the problem with that is then they're out on the street and, what comes along with all of that is being assaulted, especially if you're a female. It's horrific. And, you're just sleeping in your sleeping bag behind a bush anywhere you can. Someone stumbles across you at night and they steal all your stuff or they beat you up or you're raped or there's just all kinds of horrific things that happen. And then you start to cope with that. So many of my clients that originated being sober quickly became drug addicts or alcoholics to cope with life. But then there's other things going on, like there's a bridge near the local junior college here. And that was the local, I came to realize that was a local heroin den. So you go under that bridge and they have all these carpets that they've surely stolen that they've just laid out across the dirt banks. Right. And then they've built these little shacks there. And I'm walking up and there's empty syringes everywhere. There's people that are shooting up at the moment.
And these probably aren't diabetics like me.
I don't know. Who knows? Actually, unfortunately, a lot of diabetics are in this. And people with abscesses. I've hauled people into my car that were dying and urinating on me while I'm hauling them in to rush into the emergency room, save their life, literally. It just spirals down. The one by DVC, the other problem is they were intentional about being there because there's a lot of students at that age going to the local junior college that are into experimentation and having a good time.
Right.
And so
I was a theater degree there. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So they would shoot them up and the way drug dealers work, they would shoot them up for free and away you go. And
First time's for free.
Yeah, and
I definitely met a couple of
who's
those people there who probably actually that spot.
Oh my gosh! You know, I
Yeah.
just realized that's how gyms get you too.
Yeah, that's how gyms.
Wow.
First history,
Wow.
man.
Drugs or
Yeah.
weights, either way. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And last time I worked out with you, I was pretty incapacitated.
That was fun.
I had to take one hand to lift my other
I
hand on
remember-
my steering wheel because I couldn't move my arms.
I've
You had to
definitely been there.
preach the next
I've been
day.
sitting in a car for like 15 minutes. What have I done?
I know I'm crying. That's what I've done. But and so they can't. And if it's a woman, people don't want to hear this in Contra Costa County, but there's a lot of human trafficking going on.
Well, I remember a couple of years ago there was that billboard right off of right by the Maya Cinema. No.
The Maya Cinema.
It's out of ways. I'm terrible with the road
Okay.
numbers just because I'm always on autopilot. I've been driving the same roads for 10 years to get anywhere, but it's right past Port Chicago, the overpass,
Okay.
and you go through down towards Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And then there was just off of the side. This is completely useful information, by the way. For
Okay.
people who are not in the Bay
we'll
Area,
figure,
but
we'll figure.
Yeah.
there's a Target. It's a shopping center off to the left, heading towards Sacramento. There was a billboard out there that had it was like a hotline
Yeah.
for people who were trafficked.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it was also one of those. It was like this is the uncomfortable reality thing. This is actually quite. It was a statistic for Contra Costa. I don't remember what it was, and this is a couple of years ago, so it's no longer current.
Yeah.
Or up, but it was like this is actually a reality we have to deal with. There's still trafficking
Oh yeah.
in this county.
And then, what happens typically, so let me give you the typical story with some backup first. So in Contra Costa County, they report we have, I think, about 4,300 homeless people. Those numbers aren't super accurate because and we all know that because we go out on one day and try and count every homeless person. And we have hundreds of people doing it. And we're very diligent about it.
Right.
But the homeless know when that day is coming and they want to be left alone. And so I would stick the number at closer to 6,000 to 7,000 people in Contra Costa County and growing probably right now because of COVID issues.
Absolutely, yeah. And so many people are just not able to pay rent, and then that forgiveness isn't really there.
And so they count the number of homeless people that can be put into shelter anywhere by saying the number of beds in that homeless beds in that county.
Mhm.
And now they're all right now through July, they're in hotels. But when they go back to the homeless shelters, there's 438 beds in the Contra Costa County
For 6,000 to 7,000.
right. And then to make it even worse, if you need rehab, if you're a drug addict that genuinely or disingenuously wants to rehab, there were like 11 rehab beds in Contra Costa County that would accept the Contra Costa Health Services. Now, if you
that's not even enough for one camp.
Right. And if you had, John Muir Medical or something, there's lots of them at all these, everybody quotes the statistic. You can go to any hospital and they'll hook you up with rehab. Well, not if you don't have major medical coverage.
Right.
So now you're dealing with a population that I would estimate to be 80 to 90% drug addicted and or mental health issues, both of which would be very related.
And like I'm going to do the math actually on that.
Of 7,000 people, and you have 11 beds for the whole county.
Yeah.
So you're never going to get ahead of the problem. Never.
And correct me if I'm wrong. That raises the risk of re-addiction, or not the relapse, rather re-addiction. You're still addicted. It's just you're not.
Right.
That is
but
0.00157%.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. That is atrocious.
Right. And so and then California, and I think most other states now put in this thing called the California Access Line. So every state has one now. And so now to get it, they took the power of placing people into rehab beds out of everybody's capability. And the person that wants rehab has to call the 800 number and be interviewed.
So we have 0.00157% of people that they can help. And then they have to also, of these 7,000 homeless people
who just want to be left alone,
have to call.
Right.
So they have to get access to a phone to then call in and make all these arrangements.
And and the thought was, people like me who are working for homeless services, when we're just placing them direct, you have a huge heart for the people you're meeting.
Right.
And so you go to war to try and help them. Well, it felt like that system wasn't fair. And so they took it out of our hands. So now what what I'd have to do in the equivalency is I would have to get with the homeless person, get them to a point where they're like, Scott, you're right, I'm done. This happened all the time. And then I could have them use my county phone, which was great, to call Rehab or call the access number. But then what would happen is they said, okay, well, you definitely qualify. We'll, I think I can get you into this place next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never once did I have them place on the spot. Never. And so here's how this plays out. I have this is the one that crushed my soul. So I pull up at a Shell gas station at on a local corner on Contra Costa Boulevard near that drug den. And a beautiful young woman, probably in her early 20s, comes clawing her way out of the dirt up the hill to the side because she saw me pull in. And she says, I've had a long working relationship with her, trying to get her to leave this lifestyle. And she's crying and she says, Scott, I'm done. My boyfriend is finally in jail, so I'm not afraid he'll get me. And I want out. And I was like, oh, praise the Lord. This is awesome. So I couldn't get her into a shelter bed anywhere because we're always full. So I said, okay, well, I know you're a heavy user. Would you consider rehab? I worked for a while. No, I don't need that. That whole thing. Yep. But she really wanted out. And so I finally got her to call the access line, and they told her they had no spots anywhere, but if she calls back every morning, they'll give her priority. And so I say to her, and she hangs up and gives me that look of, this is totally helpless.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to call them at 7 a.m. from my house. And I did every morning for you. And then you meet me right here at 10 a.m. every single morning, because I knew that was her timing. And we'll get together and have you call too. And we'll double team this. We'll do this together. And she had this look of, of being defeated, but she said, okay.
She had that path. There was something actually.
And I've never seen her again.
Mm-hmm.
And I did find out later she had another child with the guy that she was afraid of. That drug den, the police, Pleasant Hill police, and I figured that out pretty rapidly together. And so together, although the homeless clients obviously didn't really realize this, in waves, we got that cleared out, and it's monitored pretty heavily now. So that looks something like me going down there and saying, hey, man, I hear the police are onto this spot. You guys need to move. Does anybody want to go into shelter, into rehab? What can I do to help? So, in their mind, I'm trying to give them the heads up. But in reality, the police don't want to just go in there and wipe everybody out. They want them to be able to live. The other issue is the police see the same person over and over and over again. They know who the dealers are. They know who the traffickers are, but they can't hold on to them with our modern court system. And so after a while, they just don't arrest them. I remember in Martinez once, a guy that we all knew was trafficking girls out to a boat. Excuse me a minute.
Oh, of course. It's super heartbreaking, especially, with outside of the fact of the modern court system. Please don't have Corona.
No, I do.
That would be a huge damper on my day.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's the funny thing too.
Imagine the looks I get when I go into a grocery store and start coughing.
Oh my goodness! I feel you all the time. I have to dope myself up on allergy meds.
I keep tissues in my car so I can blow my nose before I go in, just so people don't like.
Do you want me to close the door so you get less?
No.
Okay. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I was just gonna say. So they finally pull this guy over, and I've got confirmed reports that he's delivering drugged up girls at the Martinez Marina to boats at night. I've got confirmed. Actually, I've seen him deal drugs. Half the homeless addicted population down at the marina at the time, he was their supplier.
Wow.
Hard target for us. We really wanted him. I wanted him just arrested and put away forever, to be honest. And the police weren't too far behind. So they catch him one day. He's got a backpack on, and they open it. It's got $10,000 of crack cocaine in the backpack. All they can do by law is confiscate the drugs, write him a citation, and move him along.
Citation for something he probably won't ever pay.
He never
and then
did.
it, you know,
Never
But
did.
$10,000 of crack cocaine, surely that's a felony.
No.
Just having it. Okay,
Yeah.
please explain that one to me because I'm not clear.
I forget the total that is there, but first of all, that's not a tremendous amount. It sounds like a lot, but
the money's tremendous.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking about that through too much of a monetary lens.
Yeah.
Then.
But basically a drug charge in the state of California, and actually there's law, I think, now about, not confiscating instead of arresting.
Okay.
Because we were overpopulating the prisons with drug users, right?
Right.
And we didn't have room for murderers and all that.
Right.
And so on some level, again, it sort of makes sense. But the law in California is the police officers cite, they don't arrest.
Okay.
And they hate that law. They hate it.
I can imagine that would have some blowback.
Yeah.
Like we're missing a nice middle ground here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because again, the police officers, it's funny, doing the homeless work actually gave me a great love and respect for the police department. And you'd think it'd be the opposite. But the police, I believe your average police officer, there are some mean ones, but the average police officer, 95% or more of the police force love the people they're serving, including the homeless.
Well, you have to have a reason to put your life on the line like that for a community. You don't do it because you hate them or you want to. Oh, some folks do it for the power trip, but that's few and far between. And those ones you got to watch out
the
for.
mean ones. Yeah. And we all have them. Every city
absolutely.
Has one.
I got yelled at for looking at a turtle with my friend in high school by a police officer. Only negative interaction I've ever had with police.
I'm sure it wasn't the only thing you're doing though, knowing you. So that's problem
okay.
right
That's
there.
probably true. But that's a story for another time.